Afternoon, everyone. Happy Christmas Eve. Actually, it could be Christmas Eve. In Australia, it would technically be Christmas Eve now. But if you're in Australia, you should really be asleep. But yes, hello everyone. Do you know what I'm going to start off with? Generally speaking, I'm going to refer to some. There was a bit of a question, and it sort of sparked a bit of thought because Luke Trill, those who don't know, is like does polling for More in Common. They're doing quite a lot of interesting polling this year, and he's been talking about what's coming out of focus groups. But to begin with, and I may do a longer video on this later on, maybe just after Christmas or something like that. But we've had a little visit from the Christmas lettuce. Liz Truss has been out and about. So I'm just going to quickly go over this because this is vaguely hilarious as well as humiliating. I'm very quiet. Sorry, if I'm quiet, I'm quiet. This is the loudest it goes. It's a good microphone for podcasts. That's the maximum gain, I'm afraid. So you'll just have to turn up your own volume. Sorry about that. But yeah, Liz Truss has been tweeting. So she's been attacking Rachel Reeves's tax policies, which is fair enough. She's a Tory. And at the moment, of course, a lot of people, as I discussed in my first video today, are linking particularly the rise in national insurance on employers' contributions with a loss of business confidence, so it's fair enough to attack it. But this is what she's written. She said, economic doom loop continues thanks to Rachel Reeves's unfunded tax rises. How do you get how do you have unfunded tax rises? Because like you can have unfunded tax cuts because she instigated unfunded tax cuts. She says, I'm going to cut taxes, which meant she lowered the amount of money she had to spend, but she didn't say that she was going to lower her spending. So that's an unfunded tax cut, because if you're going to have tax cuts, you either have to be making more tax revenues naturally and therefore you can afford a smaller rate, or you have to say where you're going to cut. And she didn't do that. But you can't have an unfunded tax rise, because if you increase taxes, then your money goes up. It goes up. It's mad. And then she goes on, of course. She says, until Britain rediscovers the Laffer curve. Now, for those who don't know, and I'm going to do a video on this. For those who don't know, the Laffer curve, it's not just mad bats like her that have referred to it. Like Jeremy Hunt's referred to it earlier this year. It's a curve that supposedly tells you where you should set your tax rate for particular revenue. It works on the basis, really briefly, that obviously if you have a tax rate of 0, you won't raise any taxes, duh. But it also says if you raise the tax rate to 100%, you also won't raise any taxes, right? So it's basically saying, look, there's a certain point where, you increase taxes, okay, you increase tax revenues. But then there's another point where, because it impacts investment, you'll get less taxes. And as a concept, yes, that happens. But there isn't a curve showing it. The Laffer curve has been debunked widely because it doesn't factor loads of things in. Its basic premise assumes that absolutely everyone in a country, absolutely everyone, is fully up to date with all the latest economic information, and they understand it, and are, as a result of having all this information at their fingertips, all make exactly the right economic and financial decisions, which is of course mad. So in reality, the only people who talk seriously about the Laffer curve are people who try to argue trickle-down economics, which, along with the Laffer curve, has been debunked a long time ago. But anyway, it's nice to have a visit from the Christmas lettuce. Sorry, Stephanie, if your volume's on max, but unfortunately, this mic is absolutely everything's on max at my end. But anyway, let us get on to the question that sparked it first of all, before I go on a slight tangent, but it's sort of related. It says, how do we battle with conspiracies, political or not? How do we talk to someone who is in that camp? Is it possible to talk them out of it? So what I'm going to go on to in a minute is not directly answering the question, so I'll try and answer it really quickly first, because it's more a case of whether you should or not. You know, should you talk to people in other camps or not? Now, there's a lot of people who would say yes, and there are some people who do that. For example, I mean, the way I deal with topics on my channel is I find something in the news, or just something that occurs to me, but it's mostly something in the news, and I try and explain it and then basically put my spin on it. I try and describe what I think is going on, or what I think would result from it, or what I think would be better or worse or whatever. Now, what some people do, which is not a bad outcome, because what I've said recently is, if you look on YouTube, like if you are, if you have a YouTube channel, political channel, there's a certain part of my studio area, like the YouTube studio for creators, where it gives you video. It shows you videos that have been doing really well within your genre recently. And for the past few months, almost all of them are not just right-wing videos, they're what you would call far-right videos. Like proper, the sort of videos where the people producing them are clearly supporters of Nigel Farage, Tommy Robinson. We're not talking conservatives. We're talking, Trump supporters, Robinson supporters, Farage supporters, those sort of people. And that's basically what's beasting it at the moment in terms of political content. And what some people do, and it's not a bad strategy, I have sometimes, thought about it myself. What some people do is they will watch these videos, they'll pick up the talking points, and then what they do is they will produce a video of the same talking points from an alternative point of view, usually a left-wing or a liberal point of view. So that is one way you can do it, and that's a good way to get through to people, because there are people who, some people will just go, no, they're a lefty, I'm not going to listen to what they say. But there are some people who actually if you put up a topic that they're interested in, will watch it. I mean, I get enough comments from people who strongly disagree with my politics, but they seem to watch my videos anyway and then respond to them. So there will be people who will do that, and that is one way to get through to them. Is it possible to talk them out of it? It is possible, yes. There are people who have done that. A couple of notable examples I can give you. So first of all, for anyone who is familiar or not familiar, doesn't matter because I'll tell you anyway, with the political channel Jimmy the Giant. So Jimmy the Giant is left-wing, but he wasn't always left-wing. He was right-wing. In fact, he did a video relatively recently explaining how he got out. In fact, I think he described himself as alt-right. So he was very right-wing and now isn't. So it is and he's done a video on how he's sort of got out of it. So that might be more instructive than anything I can say. But yeah, so it is possible. And also, a few weeks ago, I had to go to that there London again. Well, I didn't have to, but I did. And it was for the launch of the all-party parliamentary group for electoral reform, which I was invited to. And someone there came up to me and said that they were quite young. They were right-wing, and apparently I converted them. I can't imagine I convert very many because, first of all, I don't aim to. I just aim to give like points of view, right? But apparently I had, he's now a Labour member. So it is certainly possible. Angry Pagan there saying maybe a new social contract is needed from Labour. Well, that's sort of what they're trying to work on. That's very much what they're doing. But, these things will take time. It will take a few years to decide whether it really works or not. But that is the other side of it. That is the other side of it. And this is where I'll just go through a couple more comments before I put the next thing up, because this question assumes you should engage. And I do think, by the way, I'm not going to argue that you should not engage with people. But there is an argument, are there some people who you can't engage with, and should you actually just take them on head on? Should Labour, for example, what should they be doing? What should their approach to Reform UK be? Should it be to take Reform UK head on? In which case, of course, they could harden the attitudes of their more trenchant supporters. Or do they try to engage with Reform UK supporters, but the way that they would do that is by not putting themselves in ideological opposition to Reform UK, simply taking their talking points and doing that. Now, that's an argument as well, although I would suggest at the moment it's not clear what Labour's strategy is because it seems a little bit confused. Power to people that say, I get people who clearly hate me but are obviously subscribed and watch my content. Quite like it proves I'm not an echo chamber. I mean, we are mostly an echo. I mean, I know I'm an echo chamber. Because if I look on my videos, you know, if I go there, it's like 99% likes. Now, do you know what? I know that I've done one that's really a bit out there. If I get something like, in fact, I'll give you one here. There's one where I'm having a pop at dear old Nigel. And I got 96.7% likes. And you think to yourself, well, that's still very high. And it is. And that just shows the echo chamber nature of it. But that is an example of a video where I get that's a very low ratio of likes to dislikes for me, because that percentage is a ratio likes to, you know, likes out of all the likes and dislikes together. So, yeah, even when you do a video that gets a load of people to go, oh, no, I do agree with that, it goes down to like 96%. So, but there are still some people watching. And you know, the other way to look at it is if you're looking at comments, so there'll be quite a few comments disagreeing. People are more likely to write a comment that's disagreeing than agreeing, because at the end of the day, if you're going to agree with something, it's like, okay, you agree with it, you're not really saying. Whereas if you disagree, I mean, some people just disagree. It's, oh, you got that completely wrong, and I go, okay, how did I get it wrong? Oh, you can't say, oh, I got it wrong. How interesting. But some people, to be fair, do. Some people will say, oh, you're wrong about this. This is what I think is the truth. You know, so you are more likely to comment if you disagree with something than agree. It's a bit like you are, if you have poor service, a business or something, you are more likely to write a letter of complaint, or an email of complaint these days, I suppose, than you are if you get especially good service to write a letter of commendation for that staff member. It's just the nature of people. But anyway, how do you deal with Space Karen, the orange one, especially through conspiracy theory? That's more difficult, because at the end of the day, what do? Are you going to ban social media? You could ban Twitter and Truth Social in this country, but I don't think Labour are planning on doing that. It's a bit extreme. It could be justified, but it is a bit extreme, and I don't see them doing it. So there's not a lot you can do, and obviously you can't. You're not. It doesn't matter whether people think it's a good idea or not. It's really not. You're not going to get Keir Starmer calling out any member of government, of the US government. It's really not going to happen. So you're not going to have Keir Starmer saying that Trump and Musk, they're idiots, you know, because he's going to behave very diplomatically towards them. Whereas they don't care about diplomacy. They will happily come out publicly and say, I mean, Trump's probably more diplomatic than Musk, but they will quite happily, if they feel the need, come out and say they're not, you know, they don't agree with Starmer. Starmer will never say that with that. He'll just like evade the question. But anyway, onto this here stuff. So Luke Trill, who does stuff for More in Common, which I say they do quite a lot of really interesting polling. They did a huge study after the election on a lot of voters' attitudes and stuff, which is something that I'm sure analysts of all the political parties read through. They certainly should have done. But this was sparked by something. Actually, first of all, Dan Hodges of the Mail on Sunday said. He said, we saw at the election, you don't need to convince people you have the solutions to their problems anymore. You just need to convince them you're not the same as the other lot. Farage and Reform are basically pursuing the strategy Labour and Starmer pursued. So, first of all, it's not quite, what he's saying is not quite right. That's not quite right. However, that doesn't mean to say it's not right. It is sort of right that, in a sense, like a lot of voters in a general election are voting for the government. They're voting for the people they want to run the government, and they will vote pragmatically for that. And the point he's trying to make, which is valid, and he has made this point in a different tweet, and it's definitely valid, is at the moment, the public do not think the Conservatives have the answers. They had 14 years, things just got worse. So at the moment, the Conservatives are down and out as a prospect for government, right? Labour at the moment they've made some missteps. Some of the stuff they've done is going to work out for the best later on. Some of them is dodgier and some of it probably isn't. Some of it is unnecessarily a poor policy. In that, it's what I would call a poor policy in that, first of all, it's not going to do any good. Now, sometimes a government has to pursue policies that are not sensible because they're needed for electoral strategy. But Labour have adopted a couple of policies, I would say at least, not going to go too far, a couple of policies that not only are not going to do any good, but they are also not electorally beneficial either, which is my definition of a bad policy. Like, it doesn't do any good for your aims, and it doesn't even help you win votes. It's just a bad policy. But anyway, what Trill has said here, and this is interesting, because he's suggested a shift. Now, he's only basing it on focus groups. Now, what I would say about focus... So for those who don't know, really quickly, a focus group is just literally when you get a group of people, like 6 to 10 people, usually, something like that. But it's a manageable group of people, and you just ask them questions and you get their responses. And the benefit of a focus group over a survey is you can get very detailed responses, and you can ask follow-up questions, and you can really find out what people think. And just to point out here, focus groups are not necessarily intended to be representative of people, because they can't anyway, it's too few people. Sometimes you deliberately have a focus group of, for example, people who voted Conservative or people who voted Reform. So, but the idea is you're trying to get the views, the detailed views of a particular group of voters. What you should then do when you've got your information from whatever you get out of a focus group isn't really information. It's data. It's not information. What you should really do is you can use it to form a hypothesis. Oh, we think these sort of people think this way. Then do a survey asking a much larger group of people to see if you're right. So when you talk about this is coming out of focus groups, I'm always a little bit wary if you haven't followed it up with a survey, because it's very anecdotal. Even when conducted by professional pollsters, it's anecdotal. Still, anecdotal stuff can be right anyway. And what he said is the big shift in the past few months in focus groups is the group of people who'd previously have said, I like the fact Farage says it like it is, but wouldn't want him as PM, and now saying we've tried the others, that hasn't worked, so we may as well roll the dice on Farage. Now that is a serious risk. As I've said before, Nigel Farage is not at all popular. He's very toxic, deeply unpopular. There's like a minority of the population who think he's the bee's knees, but everyone else hates him. Like, there are lots of politicians where they've maybe got a core of support, and to most of the rest of the country it's like, well, no, we don't really approve of them, but they don't hate them either. Whereas Nigel Farage is very divisive. People are very fixed on their views of him. They either think he's like the Messiah, or they think he's a very naughty boy. And it's really that stark. And it's not a 50-50 thing either. It's like a 70-30 thing. Sometimes 75-30, 25 even. But 70-30 we'll say. And which means that Nigel Farage is very... I think he's obviously a great recruiting sergeant for Reform UK. But I don't think Reform UK, led by Nigel Farage, can realistically win a general election, even in the future, because I think he's just too toxic. However, if people become convinced that they've tried one thing and it didn't work, and then they've tried another thing and it didn't work, we know that they will vote for a mad thing, because they did it in 2016. In 2016... as far as people were concerned, the Conservatives had had 6 years and they hadn't solved their problems. Problems, by the way, they didn't really have, but they thought they had. And because Labour were still farting about at that point, they also didn't think that Labour had the answers either. so they voted to leave the EU. This was the equivalent. It was like, we've tried Labour, that didn't work out, even though it basically did, but they, Then they tried the Conservatives, that didn't work out because they ended up with austerity. So then it's like, right, we've got to do something else. It's Labour or the Conservatives, what do we do? Well, this is a thing that might lead to something good that doesn't involve a change of government, because neither government's got the answers. So they went for Brexit. Now what's happening, the new Brexit is basically Reform UK. So now what Reform UK are trying to say is, actually, it's not a choice between Labour or the Conservatives. We're a third choice. That's what they're trying to say. I still think there are a lot of challenges for Reform UK, which Luke goes over some, but not all of them. I'll go through some more comments before I go on to the next bit. One of Peggy saying, I know at least one of my vids about the summer riot cycled some online right-wing groups, as I got a pretty high view count, but very negative comments. At least I'm pissing off the right people. Okay. I mean, people do say that. I'm not actually one of those who goes, oh, I'm upsetting this sort of person, therefore I must be doing something right, because it's quite divisive. The problem with a divisive, and I know you don't really mean it, you're just joking, but the problem with a divisive strategy is it only works if your tribe is bigger than everyone else put together in a first past the post system. So it's not very practical. And it goes back to the original question. I mean, what you actually want to do is to bring on board as many people as possible. So, and I'm not a good one to do that. I'm very undiplomatic. Like, people will say to me, I shouldn't use the term gammon, and I shouldn't ridicule Brexit, because then it's like I'm ridiculing the people who voted for Brexit. And I get that. I don't actually ridicule the people who voted for Brexit. I only ridicule the people who promoted Brexit. But I can see how people would think that and see that and perceive that. And I get that. I am not the great unifier. I'm far too plain speaking to be a good unifier. I'm not diplomatic at all. But I do think we need people who are diplomatic to do that. But anyway, then he says, that group isn't everyone, obviously, and there are still many that don't like Farage and Reform, but it is the sort of group that has the potential to take a party like Reform from their election 15% to the mid-20s. Now, polling at the moment has Reform on UK on about the mid-20s. Now, I've said before, online pollsters, the only pollster that doesn't really inflate Reform's share of the vote is Ipsos Mori, but they haven't done a voting intention poll for ages, so I don't really know what the situation is there. But they are the only ones who seem to have a good handle on Reform UK. Everyone else inflates their share of the vote when compared to actual elections. So I suspect Reform UK are not currently polling 25%. Excuse me, even though some people put them there. But the point is, do they have that potential? Yes, they do. They have the potential to attract people who don't necessarily think that they're not convinced by Reform UK. Like in 2016, a lot of people who voted Brexit, they weren't convinced by Brexit. You could talk to them, and some of them, they weren't enthusiastic about it. They just felt that it's worth trying. It's like, well, it's worth trying. And I've said this before, when I've quizzed them myself and talked to them and said, well, and I've tried to say to them, well, this will happen, and this will happen. These experts are saying this will happen, this will be really bad, right? And they took the attitude, if Brexit looks like it's going to do those things, the government will stop it. That was the attitude of a significant, I don't know how many people, because no one polled for it, but of people I came across, so again, it's anecdotal. People had this attitude that the government wouldn't allow it to cause that much damage, and if it looked like it was going to, and they couldn't get the benefits, they would just stop it, because the referendum, as I kept pointing out to them, was advisory. It wasn't like cast iron, and that's the problem, and that's the same thing that could happen here. People may think if neither Labour nor the Conservatives look like they're doing the business, they could take a punt on Reform UK, assuming that when it comes to it, no government ends up being really that bad. And they might take heart from, like, Donald Trump during his first presidency, for example. in this country, you could easily, I mean, he caused a lot of damage in America. But in this country, you could easily think, well, it was all right. America didn't like burn to the ground or anything. So it seemed like it was okay. And they may feel the same thing. Now, this is where I am going to say there are a couple of things that are, you know, because it looks like doom and gloom at the moment. There are a couple of things that are more hopeful. First, I really don't think Labour in a few years' time are going to be looking like they haven't delivered anything. I actually do think they will have shown delivery. So I do think that when you talk about this particular group that Luke Trill is talking about, I think that group of people will agree that Labour are making improvements and are worth sticking with for a bit. And the other thing I would point out is Trump is obviously going to get a second term, and if he really badly shits the bed, that again is a cautionary tale for people taking a punt on populists. So I do think Reform UK are not going to have all the running. It's just, I think that they're going to have very good running for at least another year. And it might be 2 years, because Labour, I've given up on them as a communicative force. I just think their communication's awful. It's dreadful. And I think it's fundamentally awful to the point where I don't think it's they've got the wrong strategy. I think they've got the wrong people. I just think they've got the wrong people dealing with their communications, because it's woeful. And it's not just that they've had a couple of bad slips. Anyone can have a bad slip. And obviously, if you're in a high pressure situation like head of government, or top of government rather, you know, it's more noticeable when you mess up. But they mess up every time. They've had no PR successes since like July. In the first couple of weeks, it was great. Oh, it was fantastic. But since July, there's been no PR successes at all for Labour. None at all. But anyway, then he says the challenge for the main party is convincing people they can deliver, and in Tory's case, that they've learnt lessons and have an appealing alternative offer. Everyone knows that's not happening in the next few years. Because the first step to that is to apologise for what they did. They have to acknowledge, even if they don't agree with it, they have to acknowledge the things that the public blamed them for are real. You can't tell the public they were wrong. That doesn't work. And so the Tories, because they won't even apologise or acknowledge their failures, I mean, they're happy to say, yeah, we messed up. Kemi Badenoch, oh yeah, we messed up. But she won't actually admit that the things the public think they messed up on are what they messed up on. They think it's something else. Basically, Kemi Badenoch's attitude is, oh yeah, we're sorry. Yeah, we did mess up. We weren't crazy enough. It's like, no, the public's thinking, no, you were too crazy. Anyway, it says, but also probably will require taking the fight to reform directly rather than not engaging and finding the right way to do that. Now, here's where there is, I think, a real question, because I think there is a case for taking on reform directly, and that would be a worthwhile strategy. But like I always say, the problem with that is you entrench the views of the committed reform supporters, and you will never get through to them, because you are because it's like I said when I get comments from people, like, I do not attack people. I've never attacked people who voted Brexit. I have, I suppose, actually, no, I'm lying. There was one exception, I think, when I attacked some people living in Spain. It's actually my most viewed video. People living in Spain, British immigrants in Spain, who will all call themselves expats, of course, who voted Brexit but didn't bother to learn how it would impact their life in Spain. And, you know, then a load of them found themselves being deported. Bang goes their retirement in the sun. So, yeah, okay. But mostly I don't ridicule the people who voted Brexit. I ridicule the architects of Brexit. But the people who voted Brexit will inevitably watch my Brexit content a lot of the time and probably feel that I'm attacking them. And the same thing would happen with Labour. If they take Reform UK head on, which is a viable strategy, it's better than doing nothing, then what they will do is those sort of trenchant Reform UK supporters will feel that Labour are also attacking them. And, you know, they have to accept that. The alternative is you try to engage with those supporters. In the same way that Starmer, for example, engaged with Daily Mail supporters, Daily Mail readers, Sun readers, Telegraph readers, Times readers, Express readers, by writing articles in their papers, appealing to them directly. He didn't describe the Daily Mail as the Daily Heil or anything like that. He didn't call the Telegraph the Tory graph. He didn't attack those two newspapers. He wrote articles in them. That is another one. That is another strategy. And the two strategies are mutually exclusive, I think. I don't think it's easy to adopt both of them. So I think you have to choose. My concern at the moment is they're not doing either. They don't, they may be trying to, but they're not good. And I suppose the reason why I might be minded to agree with Luke Trill here, that Labour would be better to take Reform UK head on, is because the alternative strategy of trying to engage Reform supporters and get through to them requires good communication skills. Now, I think you can probably tell what I think the problem there is. Whereas taking Reform UK head on is a much blunter instrument. It's much easier to do. So I think they probably should. What I don't think they should do is neither, or to prevaricate and not have. I am not convinced Labour have a strategy for dealing with Reform UK beyond just, well, let's fix housing, let's get people's incomes up, let's get NHS waiting lists down, and let's, give the impression we're managing immigration. That seems to me to be the only... It's a bit like, if we talk about the housing, I've already talked about this. Labour's attitude to housing is planning reform. It's not, should we immigrate in a load of skilled tradesmen because we don't have enough people in this country. It's not, should we modernise the way we build houses with prefabs and stuff. No, it's planning reforms. It's a one-trick pony. It's a one-size-fits-all. It's a magic bullet. Planning reform. I worry that they have the same attitude to Reform UK. I worry that is what they do, that they think to themselves, the way to deal... Because Starmer said this before the election. He's quite right. The way to deal with populism is deliver for ordinary working people. That's what he said, deliver for ordinary people. Better fix housing, fix the NHS, get people's incomes higher, get more people in people's pockets, more money in people's pockets, deal with crime, deal with immigration. That's what he said. And that is right, but I think that's part of the solution. I don't think it's the whole solution. But I do worry that Labour... Now, I don't know, because I'm not privy to their discussions. But I'm not... And they're obviously not going to come out and openly say, right, we're today going to announce our policy to make Nigel Farage look like a right fraud. Because they'll just do it. They'll not announce it. But I'm not seeing any sounds about it. Past people say, last few here says, I was just clouded with anger about austerity, and though voting leave was a protest vote, I changed my mind in time, but obviously a few million didn't. Yes. Oranga Pagan there saying, I'm angry at those who voted away those benefits of EU membership they got to enjoy as adults that I never got to, as well as Tory voters who screwed my generation for their own self-interest. But that is, from a practical point of view, that is a problem, though, because what you need those people to change. I mean, the reason why Labour are in power now is because the people who had voted Conservative, they didn't all die off. The people who had voted Conservatives switched. There wasn't loads. It didn't take a huge number of them, but a significant number switched from the Conservatives to Labour, and in some seats the Lib Dems. That helped as well. But that didn't contribute to Labour's majority. So in terms of Labour's majority, that was entirely about people voting Labour. And that was people who had in the past voted Conservative, voting Labour now. So you have to bring them on board. You can, it only works to the benefit of the Tories, I think, if you try to create a them and us situation. Divide and rule doesn't work for progressive politics. So as much as you can be angry at people, because you might look at it and you go, well, why did you vote for Brexit? You were ignoring trade experts, and you were listening to people who are just career politicians and have never had anything to do with trade. And that sounds like a ridiculously reckless thing to do. And I would agree, that's a reckless thing to do. You should not make such an important decision based on based on what a politician says, when literally all the experts are saying, no, this is a mad idea. But that doesn't help you reverse it. To reverse Brexit, you need people who did support Brexit. I mean, we can just wait around 20 years for them to naturally die out. But I would like to get things moving a bit quicker. So that means you need to persuade them that actually we should have changed it. But anyway, we'll leave it there. We've gone right over. Have a great rest of day, everyone. I will just point out, so there will be a Christmas Eve stream tomorrow. That may last longer, and that will be, all subscribers will be able to post in the chat there. That'll be a more open public one. I've done a few of those in the past. But yeah, have a great day. Until next time, I'll see you later.